Get your hands off her. The furious shout ripped through the elegant ballroom, just as Jason Reed's fingers tightened around Chloe Mitchell's wrist. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, soft jazz floated through the charity gala, and conversations came to an abrupt halt as dozens of startled guests turned toward the commotion. "You think you can ignore me?" Jason hissed, his polished smile gone. "After everything I did for you." Chloe's heart pounded. Months had passed since he dumped her, because as he'd once cruelly confessed, he couldn't bear introducing a plus-size girlfriend to his wealthy colleagues, yet he still refused to let her find peace. She pulled against his grip. He only squeezed harder. Panic swallowed every rational thought. Without looking, without thinking, she rushed toward the nearest man standing beside her, wrapped both arms around his neck, and pressed her lips against his. The ballroom froze. For one impossible second, the stranger didn't push her away. Then everything exploded. Several men in black suits moved with terrifying speed, slamming Jason's security team to the marble floor before anyone could react. More armed men emerged from every entrance, surrounding the ballroom with disciplined precision. A horrified whisper spread through the crowd. "My God, that's Lorenzo De Luca." Faces drained of color. Politicians lowered their eyes. Business tycoons stopped breathing. Even the hotel's security staff instinctively stepped back. Slowly, Chloe opened her eyes and pulled away from the kiss. Only then did she notice the man she'd embraced. Tall, impeccably dressed. Dark eyes so calm they seemed almost emotionless. A face the entire East Coast feared. She had just kissed the most ruthless mafia boss in America, and awakened a side of him no one had ever seen. The applause that had welcomed the evening's charity fundraiser had vanished. Now the ballroom stood in stunned silence. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Chloe Mitchell felt every heartbeat echo in her ears as she slowly stepped away from the stranger she'd kissed. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. She couldn't even bring herself to look directly into his face. I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely audible. She had expected anger, disgust, perhaps even a slap. Instead, nothing. The man simply looked at her. His expression remained unreadable, as though no emotion had crossed his mind at all. Yet the quiet intensity in his dark eyes made her feel strangely safe instead of ashamed. Behind him, however, the room had transformed into controlled chaos. Jason's two bodyguards were pinned face first against the polished marble floor before either of them realized what had happened. More men, all wearing tailored black suits and concealed earpieces, had appeared from every entrance with military precision. None of them raised their voices. They didn't need to. Their discipline alone was enough to terrify everyone watching. Jason's confident grin disappeared. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, jerking his arm free from one of the guards. One of the security men ignored him completely. His attention remained fixed on the stranger Chloe had kissed. "Boss." Just one word. Nothing more. The man gave the slightest nod. Only then did the guards ease their grip, though none lowered their vigilance. A nervous murmur rippled through the ballroom. Did he just call him boss? That's impossible. It can't be. Then someone near the stage gasped loudly enough for everyone to hear. Lorenzo De Luca. The name spread through the crowd like wildfire. Within seconds, conversations dissolved into frightened whispers. A state senator quietly stepped backward. A billionaire real estate developer suddenly found the crystal chandelier above him fascinating enough to avoid looking in Lorenzo's direction. Several guests discreetly walked toward the exits. Even those who had never met him recognized the name. Stories about Lorenzo De Luca existed everywhere. Officially, he was one of America's most successful businessmen. His foundation funded hospitals. His companies rebuilt neighborhoods. His investments employed thousands. Unofficially, he controlled an empire powerful enough to make politicians negotiate before making decisions that affected his interests. People didn't know which stories were true. They only knew one thing. No one wanted to become one of them. Chloe blinked in confusion. The terrified reactions around her made no sense. She looked back at the man she'd kissed. He certainly looked important. Impeccably tailored charcoal suit, perfect posture, calm, restrained confidence. But nothing about him resembled the terrifying monster everyone seemed to imagine. He simply looked tired. Jason forced out an awkward laugh. There must be some misunderstanding. No response. He cleared his throat. I was just having a private conversation with my ex-girlfriend. Still nothing. The silence became unbearable. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She was trying to leave. Jason stiffened. What? I saw her trying to leave. Lorenzo's gaze never wavered. You stopped her. Jason quickly recovered his arrogance. She's emotional. We've dated for years. This doesn't concern you. Another pause. Then Lorenzo asked quietly, Did she ask you to touch her? Jason hesitated. No, but. Then let her go. Simple. Calm. Undeniable. Jason laughed louder than necessary. You don't understand. She's confused. She always overreacts. Chloe lowered her head. She knew those words. For 3 years, Jason had explained away every cruel remark. Every insult had become her fault. Every humiliation had somehow been proof that she wasn't trying hard enough. She remembered standing in front of mirrors, promising herself she would lose another 20 pounds. Buying dresses 2 sizes too small, because Jason said they were motivation. Skipping birthday cake with her own mother. Pretending not to cry after hearing him joke that dating her had been a charity project. Each memory landed like another stone on her chest. She had believed him, for far too long. Lorenzo noticed none of the tears reached her eyes. She had learned to hide pain long before tonight. That realization unsettled him more than he expected. He had spent decades reading liars, rivals, corrupt officials, and dangerous men. Fear looked different. Greed looked different. Manipulation looked different. This woman possessed none of them. Only exhaustion. Only quiet dignity. Jason stepped closer. Chloe. His tone softened into artificial concern. Come here. We'll forget this happened. I'll drive you home. She didn't move. He reached toward her again. Before his hand traveled halfway, one of Lorenzo's security men silently stepped between them. Jason froze. The bodyguard hadn't threatened him, hadn't spoken. He simply stood there, like a wall that could never be moved. Embarrassment flushed Jason's face. Guests watched with growing fascination. Only minutes ago, Jason Reed had entered the gala convinced everyone admired him. Now, no one was looking at him. Every eye remained fixed on the woman he'd spent months trying to convince she was worthless. Chloe took a slow breath. I'm leaving. She spoke quietly. Not to Jason, to the room, to herself. I'm sorry for interrupting your evening. Then she turned toward Lorenzo. I'm especially sorry to you. I shouldn't have involved you. It was selfish. I panicked. For the first time all evening, Lorenzo noticed the sincerity in her apology. She wasn't trying to excuse herself. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't impressed by his reputation. She simply felt guilty for causing trouble to a stranger. That was unusual. Most people spent years trying to get close to him. This woman seemed desperate to get away. Without waiting for forgiveness, Chloe offered one final embarrassed smile before walking toward the ballroom exit. No one stopped her. No one laughed. The same guests who had ignored Jason's cruelty moments earlier now instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path for her to leave. Jason watched helplessly. He wanted to follow. One glance from Lorenzo's security team convinced him otherwise. As the ballroom doors slowly closed behind Chloe, Lorenzo remained standing exactly where she had left him. He looked down for the briefest moment, almost unconsciously. His fingertips brushed lightly against the place where her trembling hand had rested on his shoulder. It had lasted only seconds. A meaningless accident. That was what he told himself. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, the memory refused to disappear. By the time Chloe stepped out into the cool evening air, her pulse had finally begun to slow. The grand entrance of the Riverside Grand Hotel shimmered beneath rows of golden lights, while chauffeurs waited beside sleek luxury cars. Guests laughed as they arrived, unaware that only moments earlier, one of the most powerful men in America had nearly turned a charity gala into a battlefield because of a frightened woman. Chloe wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. "What have I done?" she whispered. She replayed the kiss over and over. It had lasted no more than 2 seconds. She hadn't even seen the man's face before throwing her arms around him. How could anyone be so reckless? If he truly was Lorenzo De Luca, as everyone had whispered, then she had just humiliated a man whose name made governors nervous and rival crime families disappear. The thought alone made her stomach sink. I should write an apology. Then she laughed bitterly at herself. An apology to a billionaire? A mafia boss? As if someone like him would even remember her tomorrow. She called for a rideshare and quietly disappeared into the night. Inside the ballroom, however, no one had returned to celebrating. The orchestra had stopped playing. Champagne remained untouched. Clusters of wealthy donors whispered behind carefully practiced smiles. Jason Reed stood frozen, painfully aware that every conversation in the room revolved around him. Not because he was admired, because he had just been publicly dismissed. He forced himself to approach Lorenzo. "I think tonight got a little out of hand." No answer. Jason continued anyway. "My ex has always been dramatic. I hope you understand she isn't." Lorenzo slowly turned his eyes toward him. Jason forgot the rest of his sentence. Those eyes carried no anger, no visible threat. Only complete indifference. Somehow, that frightened him more. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. "Do you enjoy making people feel small?" Jason blinked. "What? You chose a public event. You waited until she couldn't leave without creating a scene. You mocked her. You grabbed her." His voice never changed. Each sentence landed with surgical precision. Jason attempted another smile. "Relationships are complicated. She knows I didn't mean." "No." The single word cut through the room. "You meant every word." Silence. Jason suddenly felt dozens of eyes studying him. For the first time in years, his expensive suit and confident posture couldn't hide his insecurity. He cleared his throat. "I think you've misunderstood." Lorenzo looked toward one of his security directors. "Mr. Reed's invitation." Within seconds, a staff member hurried over. "It has been revoked." Jason stared. "What?" The event organizer swallowed nervously. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. The board has decided." "No." The organizer glanced toward Lorenzo before correcting himself. "The board has unanimously agreed that tonight's fundraiser should remain focused on charity." Jason understood exactly what had happened. No one wanted to offend Lorenzo. Not tonight. Perhaps not ever. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. The whispers followed him all the way out. Lorenzo remained where he was. His chief of security, Marco Vitale, approached cautiously. "In 23 years, Marco said quietly, I've never seen you allow anyone inside your personal space." Lorenzo picked up a glass of sparkling water. "Neither have I." Marco smiled faintly. "You could have moved." "I could have. But you didn't." Lorenzo didn't answer, because he had already asked himself the same question. The truth made no sense. The instant Chloe had wrapped her arms around him, he'd recognized pure fear. Not calculation, not seduction. Fear. Her entire body had been trembling. She hadn't kissed him to gain power. She had kissed the nearest person who looked capable of protecting her. For reasons he couldn't explain, he hadn't wanted to let her fall. Later that evening, Lorenzo sat alone inside the rear cabin of his armored Bentley. The city lights blurred beyond the tinted windows. Marco reviewed tomorrow's schedule. 9 o'clock. Shipping negotiations. 11. Meeting with the governor. 1. Foundation board. 3. Private security briefing. Lorenzo listened without hearing a word. Instead, he remembered brown eyes filled with panic. A trembling apology. "I'm especially sorry to you." Most people apologized because they feared him. She apologized because she believed she had inconvenienced a stranger. The distinction refused to leave his mind. Across the city, Chloe unlocked the modest apartment she shared with her mother. The familiar scent of chamomile tea drifted from the kitchen. Her mother looked up immediately. "You're home early." Chloe forced a smile. The fundraiser ended sooner than expected. Did everything go well? There was a long pause. It was memorable. Her mother laughed softly. "I'll take that as a yes." Chloe almost told her everything. About Jason. About the kiss. About the terrifying name everyone had whispered. Instead, she simply hugged her mother. A little longer than usual. "You okay?" her mother asked. "I'm just tired." That wasn't entirely true. She wasn't tired. She was emotionally exhausted. After helping her mother to bed, Chloe sat alone by the living room window. Rain had begun falling outside. She opened her laptop, intending to finish several non-profit accounting reports due next week. Instead, she searched one name: Lorenzo De Luca. Hundreds of articles appeared. International businessman, real estate investor, philanthropist, shipping magnate. Photographs showed him standing beside presidents, governors, foreign diplomats, and CEOs. Not one picture showed him smiling. Every headline described influence, power, mystery, rumors. She closed the laptop almost immediately. No. There is absolutely no chance I'll ever see that man again. The idea felt almost comforting. Some encounters belonged to chance alone. This would become one of those embarrassing memories she laughed about years later. She had no reason to think otherwise. The following morning, Lorenzo arrived at the De Luca Foundation headquarters. The 40-story building overlooked the harbor, serving as the public face of countless charitable projects, children's hospitals, scholarship programs, veterans housing, disaster relief. Few outsiders understood why a man feared across the country invested so heavily in helping strangers. Lorenzo preferred it that way. During the weekly executive meeting, his foundation director presented a stack of new partnership proposals. "Our next community financial literacy initiative requires an independent non-profit accounting team." She slid one folder across the polished conference table. "This organization has the strongest reputation for transparency." Lorenzo opened the file without interest, then stopped. A familiar photograph. Warm brown eyes. Gentle smile. Employee name: Chloe Mitchell, senior accountant. He stared at the page several seconds longer than necessary. Marco noticed immediately. "You know her?" Lorenzo closed the folder. For the first time in years, the carefully planned schedule of America's most feared mafia boss no longer seemed like the most interesting part of his week. Perhaps fate wasn't finished with that unexpected kiss after all. 3 weeks passed. To Chloe, the charity gala slowly became nothing more than an embarrassing memory she hoped time would erase. She buried herself in work. Numbers were predictable. Spreadsheets didn't judge appearances. Financial statements never whispered cruel comments about someone's body. Every weekday morning, she arrived at the non-profit office before anyone else. She reviewed donation records, balanced grant budgets, corrected accounting discrepancies that others overlooked. Her co-workers often joked that if the organization ever lost Chloe Mitchell, the entire finance department would collapse within a week. She laughed every time. Not because she believed them, because compliments still felt unfamiliar. Years with Jason had trained her to distrust praise. Whenever someone called her intelligent, she instinctively waited for the criticism that usually followed. It never came here. Working for a non-profit reminded her that kindness still existed. That thought alone made every long day worthwhile. One Monday morning, Her department director walked into the accounting office, carrying a thick folder. "I have a new assignment." Several accountants looked up. "The DeLuca Foundation is partnering with us on a nationwide financial transparency program." The room immediately filled with excited whispers. "The DeLuca Foundation? They're huge. I heard they fund hospitals across the country. Our organization could triple its outreach." The director nodded. "They specifically requested our senior accounting team." Then she looked directly at Chloe. "I'd like you to lead the financial review." Chloe blinked. "Me? You're the best person for it. I've only handled regional grants." "Exactly. And every audit you've completed has been flawless." A warm smile spread across the director's face. "They don't need someone famous. They need someone trustworthy." Those words stayed with Chloe long after the meeting ended. Trustworthy. No one had ever used that word to describe her while she was dating Jason. 2 days later, she walked into the DeLuca Foundation headquarters, carrying nothing but her laptop and several neatly organized files. The building itself was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor. Original artwork lined the marble hallways. Employees moved efficiently, but without the tense atmosphere Chloe expected from such an influential organization. Everything felt surprisingly normal. A receptionist welcomed her with genuine warmth. "Miss Mitchell?" "Yes. Mr. DeLuca is expecting you." Chloe nearly dropped her folder. "Mr. DeLuca?" The foundation chairman. Her heartbeat instantly accelerated. Surely there had to be another Lorenzo DeLuca. There wasn't. The office doors opened quietly. There he stood. The same charcoal eyes. The same composed expression. The same impossible calm. Only this time there were no bodyguards rushing across a ballroom. No shouting. No panic. Just silence. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Then Lorenzo inclined his head ever so slightly. "Miss Mitchell." She stared. "You remember me?" One corner of Marco's mouth twitched where he stood near the far wall. Lorenzo answered without hesitation. "Yes." There was something almost amusing about her question, as though she genuinely believed a man could forget the woman who had unexpectedly kissed him in front of hundreds of people. Color rushed into Chloe's cheeks. "I've been hoping you had." A surprising silence followed. Then, Lorenzo smiled. It was barely visible. A movement so slight most people would have missed it entirely. Marco noticed. So did every executive in the room, because none of them had seen that expression in years. The meeting began. Chloe quickly shifted into professional mode. Within minutes, she stopped thinking about Lorenzo's reputation and focused entirely on financial reports. She reviewed expense summaries, compared grant allocations, highlighted inconsistencies. Finally, she looked up. "There are 2 reporting errors." The room became quiet. The Foundation's chief financial officer frowned. "Our accounting software is independently audited." "I'm sure it is." Chloe rotated her laptop toward them. "But these transportation expenses were categorized under community outreach instead of operational logistics." She calmly opened another spreadsheet. "And this charitable housing budget was counted twice." The CFO leaned forward. His expression slowly changed. "She's right." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Lorenzo said nothing. He simply watched her work. There was no arrogance. No desire to impress anyone. Only complete concentration. She wasn't trying to prove she was the smartest person in the room. She simply wanted the numbers to be accurate. He admired that, more than he expected. Over the following weeks, the project required frequent meetings, sometimes twice a week, sometimes every day. Little by little, Chloe discovered a side of Lorenzo the newspapers never described. He listened more than he spoke. He arrived exactly on time. He remembered every employee's name. When junior staff presented ideas, he never interrupted them. If someone made a mistake, he corrected the problem instead of humiliating the person. It confused her. The man she'd imagined as cold and terrifying possessed extraordinary patience. One afternoon, she finally asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Can I ask you something?" Lorenzo looked up from a report. "You just did." She smiled despite herself. "I mean, a real question." He closed the folder. "Go ahead. Why does your foundation spend so much on financial transparency?" Several executives glanced nervously toward Lorenzo. It wasn't a question most people dared ask. His answer came without hesitation. "Because people donate believing they'll help someone." He folded his hands. "If they lose that trust, the people who suffer aren't accountants. They're children, hospitals, families." The room fell silent. Chloe nodded slowly. "I agree." She hesitated. "Then why weren't these reports corrected earlier?" One executive nearly stopped breathing. Marco looked toward Lorenzo, expecting the meeting to end immediately. Instead, Lorenzo calmly turned toward his finance department. "That's an excellent question." The executives lowered their eyes. "Find the answer. No anger, no accusations, only accountability." After the meeting ended, Marco caught up beside him. "She challenged you." "Yes." "You don't seem offended." Lorenzo looked through the conference room window, where Chloe was helping a junior accountant organize several binders. "She challenged the problem. Not me." A week later, Chloe arrived carrying a paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. "I brought breakfast." The accounting team smiled gratefully. She placed pastries on the conference table. When Lorenzo entered, she casually offered him one. "Would you like a cinnamon roll?" Every executive froze. No one had ever casually offered Lorenzo De Luca a pastry during a board meeting. He looked at the paper bag, then at Chloe. "You think I eat these?" She immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. I just bought extra." A long pause followed. Then Lorenzo reached into the bag. "I suppose one won't destroy the empire." The room erupted with quiet laughter. Even Marco looked genuinely shocked. For the first time in years, the conference room didn't feel like the headquarters of an untouchable empire. It felt like ordinary people sharing breakfast before work. Lorenzo took a bite. It was warm, simple, nothing extravagant. For reasons he couldn't explain, it tasted better than meals prepared by Michelin-starred chefs. He glanced toward Chloe. She was already discussing audit procedures with another employee, completely unaware that every executive in the room was secretly watching the impossible unfold. The most feared man on the East Coast wasn't impressed by expensive gifts, political favors, or displays of power. Instead, a woman who treated him like everyone else had quietly begun changing the atmosphere around him. Someone else noticed it too. Watching from across the room with growing resentment was a newly arrived guest, Jason Reed. He had come hoping to rebuild professional connections with the foundation. Instead, he found the woman he believed would never succeed laughing comfortably beside Lorenzo De Luca. Jealousy twisted across his face. For the first time, he realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. Jason Reed had never believed in coincidence. In his world, every successful person wanted something: power, money, influence, status. That belief had always justified the way he treated others, including Chloe. As he watched her leave another meeting beside Lorenzo De Luca, laughing softly over something neither man nor woman around them could hear, an uncomfortable feeling settled deep inside him. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't regret. It was wounded pride. The woman he had once convinced she would never be good enough was slowly becoming someone people admired. Worse still, she had accomplished it without him. That evening, Jason sat alone in his downtown office overlooking Manhattan. One of his associates entered carrying a folder. "You asked us to look into Chloe Mitchell." Jason didn't bother hiding his interest. "What did you find?" The investigator opened the file. "Nothing unusual. She still works for the non-profit. Still lives with her mother. No luxury purchases. No unexplained income. No hidden investments." Jason frowned. "What about De Luca?" They've met several times through the foundation. Every meeting was business-related. No vacations, no private dinners, no expensive gifts. Jason leaned back. Impossible. The investigator hesitated. Actually, most employees describe Miss Mitchell as the only person who talks to Mr. DeLuca like a normal human being. Jason laughed sarcastically. So that's her strategy. What strategy? Playing innocent. He tossed the folder onto the desk. Nobody gets close to Lorenzo DeLuca without wanting something. Deep down. He wasn't trying to convince the investigator. He was trying to convince himself, because the alternative was unbearable. That perhaps Chloe had never been the problem. Perhaps he had been. Meanwhile, Chloe remained completely unaware of Jason's growing obsession. Her days became comfortably predictable. Morning coffee, financial reports, foundation meetings, evenings caring for her mother. One Friday afternoon, Lorenzo stopped by the accounting department after a budget review. You've been working late. Chloe looked up from her computer. So have you. He glanced at the stack of files beside her. You'll finish those Monday. They're due Tuesday. So, she smiled. I like being prepared. Lorenzo studied her for a moment. When was the last time you took a day off? She blinked. She honestly couldn't remember. He nodded toward the office windows. It's still daylight. Go home. She laughed. Is that an order? No. A suggestion. And if I refuse, I'll assume accountants are more stubborn than negotiators. She shook her head, smiling. I think you just insulted my profession. I may have. It was a surprisingly ordinary conversation, one that neither of them realized Marco had quietly witnessed from the hallway. Later that evening, he reported to Lorenzo while reviewing security updates. You smiled again. Lorenzo continued reading a report. So I've been told. 3 times this week. I wasn't counting. The staff was. Lorenzo closed the folder. They're becoming distracted. Marco couldn't help laughing. No, boss. They're becoming hopeful. News of the upcoming DeLuca Foundation annual gala spread quickly through New York's charity circles. Unlike ordinary fundraisers, this event attracted governors, judges, Fortune 500 executives, international investors, and influential philanthropists. Attendance alone elevated reputations. Being personally invited by Lorenzo DeLuca could transform careers. When Chloe received her invitation, she immediately assumed it had been sent by mistake. She walked into Lorenzo's office, carrying the elegant envelope. I think this belongs to someone else. He looked at it briefly. It belongs to you. I've never attended anything like this. Then it's time. She hesitated. I won't fit in. Those 4 words escaped before she could stop them. Silence filled the office. Lorenzo slowly stood. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Without turning around, he asked quietly, Who convinced you of that? Chloe didn't answer. She didn't need to. He already knew. Jason. Years of subtle insults. Years of carefully disguised humiliation. Years of making confidence feel selfish. Lorenzo finally faced her. You've spent months sitting in boardrooms filled with billionaires. She nodded. Has anyone here treated you as though you don't belong? She thought carefully. No. Why? She searched for an answer. Because. They care about my work. Exactly. His voice remained calm. The people worth impressing rarely care about appearances. For reasons she couldn't explain, those words affected her more deeply than dozens of compliments ever had. The night of the gala arrived. The Grand Astoria ballroom sparkled beneath thousands of crystal lights. A live orchestra played softly, while photographers captured politicians and celebrities arriving one after another. When Chloe stepped from her taxi, she almost turned around. Women in designer gowns gracefully crossed the red carpet. Men wore custom-tailored tuxedos, worth more than her annual rent. She looked down at her own navy blue evening dress. It wasn't expensive. She had bought it 3 years earlier for another charity event. It fit comfortably. Her mother had insisted she wear it. You don't need the most expensive dress. You only need the confidence to wear it. Taking a deep breath, Chloe entered the ballroom. Several Foundation employees greeted her warmly. Within minutes, she relaxed. Until she heard a familiar voice. "Well, I was wondering when you'd arrive." Her smile disappeared instantly. "Jason." Perfect tuxedo. Perfect hair. Perfect artificial smile. "I didn't expect you'd still be wearing bargain dresses." She sighed quietly. "Good evening, Jason. You clean up nicely." His eyes traveled across the ballroom. "So, where is your billionaire?" Several nearby guests glanced toward them. Chloe kept her voice even. "I'm here to support the Foundation." "Of course you are." He chuckled loudly enough for others to hear. "I suppose kissing the richest man in the room worked out pretty well." More people began listening. Chloe felt dozens of eyes turning toward her. She could have explained everything. She could have told them about panic, fear, harassment. Instead, she simply said, "Please don't do this." Jason smiled wider. "Oh, I'm just telling the truth." He raised his champagne glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," the nearby conversations gradually stopped. "You all deserve to know how impressive Miss Mitchell truly is." The ballroom grew quieter. She found the fastest way to success. A few uncertain laughs echoed. Jason continued. "When she saw a powerful man, she kissed him before anyone else could." This time the laughter spread farther. Whispers followed. "Was it planned? I heard something happened months ago. So that's how she met DeLuca. How embarrassing." Chloe stood perfectly still. Every cruel memory Jason had ever created rushed back at once. The mirrors, the diets, the shame, the endless feeling that she would always be judged before anyone learned her name. Tears threatened. She refused to let them fall. She would not beg. She would not defend herself by dragging Lorenzo into another public scene. If people wanted to believe the worst, she couldn't stop them. Jason noticed her silence and mistook it for defeat. He took another step forward. "See? Not even denying it." The ballroom waited. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others simply watched. Exactly as they had months earlier. Exactly as they had when no one had defended her. Except this time, someone else had already begun walking toward the stage. And with every measured step he took, the laughter slowly died. Every conversation in the Grand Astoria ballroom faded into silence. One by one, heads turned. Lorenzo DeLuca was walking toward the stage. He neither hurried nor hesitated. His polished black tuxedo reflected the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers, while his measured footsteps echoed across the marble floor with quiet authority. No one announced his arrival. No one needed to. Power like his never demanded attention. It simply commanded it. Jason's confident smile faltered for the first time that evening. Still, he forced a laugh. "Mr. DeLuca, I'm glad you're here. I was just explaining how the two of you first met." Lorenzo stepped onto the stage. His eyes rested briefly on Chloe. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped together to stop their trembling. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't asked him for help. She had simply endured. That hurt him more than any insult Jason had spoken. Lorenzo slowly turned toward Jason. His voice remained calm. "No." Jason frowned. "I'm sorry?" "No." The single word echoed across the silent ballroom. "You've told the wrong story." Jason chuckled nervously. "I think everyone already knows what happened." Lorenzo took one slow step closer. "You kissed the first rich man you could find." Jason shrugged. "That's exactly what I said." Another pause. Then Lorenzo answered, "No. She kissed the first man she believed might stop a cruel one." The ballroom became so quiet that even the orchestra stopped playing. Lorenzo looked directly into Jason's eyes. Those are not the same thing. Jason attempted another smile. With respect, Mr. DeLuca. She used you. Lorenzo's expression never changed. If she wanted power, she chose the worst possible target. Confused whispers spread through the audience. Lorenzo continued. Power attracts people every day. They ask for favors. They ask for money. They ask for influence. They ask for introductions. He slowly looked around the ballroom. I've learned to recognize ambition within seconds. Then his eyes returned to Chloe. She asked for none of those things. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. She apologized. A quiet murmur rippled across the room. Several executives nodded unconsciously. They remembered. She really had apologized. Repeatedly. Lorenzo continued. She spent weeks treating me exactly as she treated everyone else. No special treatment. No expensive requests. No attempt to impress anyone. He glanced toward the foundation executives. She corrected our financial reports. She challenged our mistakes. She refused every unnecessary privilege. One by one, senior board members nodded. Everything he said was true. Jason felt the room slipping away from him. He laughed again, louder this time. So what? She's still the woman who kissed a stranger. Lorenzo answered without hesitation. Yes. The first kiss was an accident. The ballroom waited. Lorenzo slowly descended from the stage. Each step brought him closer to Chloe. His gaze never left hers. When he finally stopped in front of her, he extended his hand. Not dramatically, not theatrically, simply, with quiet certainty. For a brief second, Chloe stared at it. She whispered almost desperately, "You don't have to do this." Only Lorenzo heard those words. He smiled very gently. "I know." She looked into his eyes. There was no pity, no obligation, no performance, only choice. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with calm confidence. Warm, steady, safe. Lorenzo turned back toward the crowd. The first kiss was an accident. A small smile appeared. What happens next? He looked at Chloe before finishing. Will be my choice. For 2 heartbeats, no one moved. Then applause erupted. Not polite applause. Thunderous applause. Governors stood. Judges stood. Foundation directors stood. One after another, nearly every guest rose to their feet. The same people who had remained silent during Chloe's humiliation now applauded the courage they wished they had shown earlier. Several guests lowered their eyes in shame. They understood exactly what Lorenzo meant. Jason hadn't humiliated Chloe alone. An entire room had allowed it. Jason's face turned pale. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly be serious. Lorenzo didn't even look at him. Instead, Marco stepped forward carrying a thin folder. He handed it quietly to Jason. Jason opened it. His expression collapsed. Inside were legal notices. Every pending partnership between Jason's law firm and companies connected to the DeLuca Foundation had been terminated. Several major corporate clients had already withdrawn their contracts. Others were under review. Jason looked up in disbelief. You destroyed my business. Lorenzo finally spoke. No, you did. You built your reputation by humiliating people you believed couldn't answer back. He paused. The problem with that strategy is eventually you choose the wrong person. Security approached Jason. This time no one protested as he was escorted toward the exit. Not a single guest followed him. Not one offered support. The doors closed behind him. Quietly. Permanently. The ballroom slowly returned to life. Music resumed. Conversations restarted. Yet the atmosphere had completely changed. People no longer whispered about Chloe's appearance. Instead, they introduced themselves. A federal judge thanked her for her non-profit work. A hospital director praised the Transparency Project. A governor's wife complimented her kindness toward junior foundation employees. Each conversation felt genuine, not because Lorenzo stood beside her, because people had finally noticed the woman who had been there all along. Later that evening, while guests danced beneath the chandeliers, Chloe and Lorenzo stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered below them like a sea of stars. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Chloe broke the silence. "I'm sorry." Lorenzo looked at her. "For what?" "For dragging you into my life." He smiled faintly. "I seem to remember you apologizing the first time we met." "I did. You've apologized enough." She laughed softly. "So have you." He raised an eyebrow. "I apologized? You keep trying to fix things that weren't your fault." Those words lingered between them. Lorenzo slowly looked toward the city. "For years, I believed protecting people meant solving their problems." He glanced back at her. "You reminded me. Sometimes protecting someone simply means standing beside them." Chloe felt her eyes sting. No expensive gift. No dramatic declaration. No extravagant promise. Just a simple truth. It somehow meant more than anything she had ever imagined. As music drifted through the open ballroom doors, Lorenzo quietly offered his arm. "May I have this dance?" "This time," she smiled before answering. "I'd like that." Together, they walked back inside. Not as a frightened woman seeking refuge, and not as the most feared man in America, but as two people who had finally found someone who saw their true worth. 6 months later, the Grand Astoria Ballroom hosted another charity gala. The chandeliers sparkled just as brilliantly. The orchestra played the same timeless melodies. The guest list was even more impressive than before. Governors, federal judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, international philanthropists, leaders from organizations across the country. Yet something about the evening felt completely different. No one whispered. Not this time. When Chloe Mitchell stepped through the ballroom doors, conversations paused, but only for a moment. Not because people were judging her, because they wanted to greet her. "Miss Mitchell, so wonderful to see you again." The financial literacy program has already helped over 12,000 families. Your recommendations transformed our reporting system. The Children's Hospital wanted me to thank you personally. One after another, respected leaders approached her. Not out of obligation. Not because they feared someone standing beside her. Because they genuinely respected the woman she had proven herself to be. Chloe smiled warmly, remembering another night in this very ballroom. The same polished floor, the same crystal lights, the same elegant crowd. Back then, she had stood alone while people whispered about her appearance. Tonight, they spoke about her character. Across the room, Lorenzo watched quietly. Marco stepped beside him. "You were right." Lorenzo looked at him. "About what?" Marco nodded toward Chloe. "You never changed who she was. You simply gave people enough time to see it." Lorenzo remained silent, because Marco understood something most people never would. Love had never been about rescuing Chloe. She had never needed rescuing. She had survived years of humiliation without losing her kindness, without losing her compassion, without becoming bitter. What she needed was someone who refused to let the world overlook her any longer. The master of ceremonies approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we would like to recognize two individuals whose leadership has transformed not only this foundation, but countless lives beyond it." A spotlight slowly crossed the ballroom. It stopped on Chloe. She looked genuinely startled. "I think they're looking for you," Lorenzo whispered. She laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't." The audience applauded as she reluctantly walked onto the stage. The foundation chairman smiled. Most awards celebrate achievements that can be measured. Money raised. Projects completed. Buildings constructed. He paused. But some contributions cannot be calculated. He turned toward Chloe. "Miss Mitchell reminded all of us that integrity is invisible, until someone refuses to compromise it." Another wave of applause filled the room. Several employees wiped away quiet tears. They remembered the first meetings, the homemade pastries, the uncomfortable questions she had been brave enough to ask. The way she thanked interns and janitors with the same sincerity she showed executives. She had never tried to become extraordinary. She had simply chosen to remain kind, again, and again, and again. After the ceremony, guests gathered for the final dance of the evening. Soft music floated beneath the chandeliers. Lorenzo extended his hand. "Dance with me?" Chloe smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." As they stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd naturally made room for them. Not because anyone had been instructed to, because respect often speaks louder than protocol. They moved slowly together, comfortably, without needing words. After a long silence, Chloe looked up at him. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." She hesitated. "For years, I believed that night was the luckiest accident of my life." Lorenzo smiled. "I've been meaning to correct you." She tilted her head. "The kiss didn't save you." She laughed softly. "No, you had already saved yourself. You left the man who wanted you to believe you weren't enough. You rebuilt your confidence. You chose kindness instead of resentment. I merely happened to be standing nearby." Emotion shimmered in her eyes. "And you?" Lorenzo's smile became warmer than anyone in the ballroom had ever seen. "I spent most of my life believing strength meant never letting anyone close." He gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Then a frightened woman trusted a complete stranger for 2 seconds, and somehow taught the strongest man in the room what courage actually looked like. Chloe's eyes glistened. "So, we rescued each other?" Lorenzo chuckled quietly. "I think that's much closer to the truth." The music slowed. He leaned closer, until only she could hear him. "You thought that kiss saved you." He smiled. "It saved me too," she answered by resting her head gently against his shoulder. No grand declaration was necessary. No audience needed convincing. The room around them faded into little more than warm light and distant music. Months earlier, Chloe had believed no attractive man could ever truly love someone who looked like her. She had been wrong, because the right man had never fallen in love with her appearance. He had fallen in love with the quiet courage hidden beneath years of doubt. And Lorenzo De Luca, the man powerful enough to command empires, had discovered that the rarest treasure in the world was not loyalty bought through fear, but love freely given by a woman whose heart had never stopped believing in kindness. As the applause rose around the dance floor one final time, neither of them looked toward the crowd. They looked only at each other. Sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories begin with destiny. Sometimes, they begin with one desperate kiss.